Welcome to another episode of Growth Marketers Podcast. I'm Solomon Timothy.
And I am Taylor Rowe. Today's episode was all about B2B marketing and understanding which metrics and analytics to track. And we specifically dove into leading indicators versus lagging indicators or lagging measures, and which KPIs as a B2B marketer you should be tracking, you should be measuring for your own success, as well as kind of reporting to leadership in terms of the overall organization. Are we trending or are we moving in the right direction? So we got into a couple of good topics there. So hopefully you guys find some value and enjoy.
So Taylor, today's topic is metrics, tracking B2B campaign metrics, right? We do a fair amount of B2B campaigns. Our company is a B2B company. So when you're running ads, it's very hard to measure because your sales cycle could be 6 weeks, 6 months, and people are very anxious to see the ROI.
Right.
How do you break down, how do you track B2B metrics? And there's a lot that we educate our clients on, but I want to kind of go a little bit deeper on that today.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think B2B marketers specifically a lot of times track the wrong metrics for whatever reason. As soon as we had the ability as marketers to track things like attribution, then it became we're only going to put money into things that we can then track. When in reality, you have to look at kind of the purpose of marketing, and some of the best marketing, you look at a brand, like how do you measure the overall, brand equity, brand awareness? Like some of those things are not as measurable, but way more effective at actually driving revenue, which is the end goal. So the way that we look at it with our clients is first we have to understand the business goals, and then we work backwards from there of how do we influence those business goals and what metrics would actually indicate that we're trending in the right direction, right? So we can almost break it down into like leading indicators versus lag indicators. Like a lag indicator would be like revenue, right?
Sure.
So like that's the end result of all of the work that we're doing on the front end is we're driving revenue. Leading indicators, again, depends on campaign, depends on channel, depends on what the company deems to be important. And a lot of times this comes from leadership, right? Because if leadership is just asking you, if you're an internal marketer, you're, an agency, and you're an internal marketer and your CEO is just coming to you, is like, okay, I gave you $10,000. Like, how many leads do I have? That's a bad culture to execute what we're talking about here, which is breaking those KPIs, those metrics into two different categories. And on the leading indicator side, some of it is measurable, some of it is not measurable. The measurable stuff, we could be looking at like awareness-based metrics. We could look at awareness metrics like just anything like views on a video or something.
Impressions.
We could look at engagement metrics like shares and likes and comments. Comments to me tells a lot more about that piece of content that you created than like just general views or likes, right?
Sure.
Because people are actually engaging. And then other things that are not really measured, like how do you put a value or a measurement on, okay, let's say we ran a Facebook ad or a LinkedIn ad to CEOs of, software companies that are between $50 and $100 million. And we only had maybe we had 1,000 impressions, but we had, 50 comments, and we generated a lead from that or whatever that may be. The value of those 1,000 visitors is so much higher because we already know it's our audience, right? So It's like who's watching, who's commenting, who's sharing, who are they tagging is something you can't really measure. But to answer your question, I would look at it in terms of leading indicators and then lagging indicators. So like I mentioned, lead indicators could be cost per lead, cost per click, I guess, traffic, rankings, if you're looking at organic. On, emails, open rates, click-through rates, that kind of stuff, attendees to a webinar, whatever is important to you as a business or for that campaign, but they have to have a direct correlation to those lagging indicators. And that's the biggest piece. Like as a marketer, you can't just say, I mentioned, it's a bad culture for the CEO to, just harp on where are my leads. You can't also just say, trust the process. So there has to be a direct correlation between those leading indicators and the lag indicator, the lag measure of we're increasing, overall opportunities in our salespeople's pipeline, or we're closing that sales cycle much faster. We have a higher sales velocity or faster sales velocity. We have a higher average lifetime value of a customer because we're doing a better job of educating them with our leading indicators or, engagement metrics and those sorts of things.
There's two sides to it, right? Many times when you don't get the leads, they often think it's a waste of money.
Right.
Like they're just not even giving any value to brand awareness, brand building. Like you said, they'll say, well, it's a comment. We didn't make any money. Right. What does that mean? So how do you go about that CMO that thinks that the only thing that matters is opportunities that may or may not even close, but hey,
Yeah. I mean, they are opportunities, but you have to look at qualified opportunities. You have to have a little bit more foresight down the road of, okay, if we have a 6-month sales cycle, you can't run a test campaign for a month and then say, our cost per lead went up 25%, 30%, and our volume of leads went down. Maybe it was cut in half, right? Or cut into a third because of this new campaign. You have to look at the end result. Well, if the sales cycle takes 6 months on average, you can't really measure the effectiveness of that until 6 months. And then things like brand awareness or even take longer, right? Because you're trying to build a brand. It's not done overnight.
Yeah. By the way, most of the time, I think people struggle with this because they're trying to figure out how much more to budget in advertising based on what it's driving in terms of revenue and where should they be, right? What is the mindset? Should we completely forgo that bottom of funnel and spend more time on building top of funnel brand awareness and seeing how people are interacting with their company? To your point, that is going to drive more revenue long run anyway than, well, we got 12 leads, but since we're a new company, they don't really want to trust us. Even though we're cheaper, better, and everything, we're still not going to get the sale.
Right. You say, people don't understand that. I think they don't understand that from a digital standpoint, but they've been doing, they do the same thing or they do the opposite rather from a traditional standpoint, right? They'll say like, okay, well, we need to see leads right away, but then we'll spend $50,000 on a trade show booth, right? And maybe we'll do 3 or 4 of those a year. If you come back with one lead or one customer from a trade show booth that you just spent $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, maybe $100,000 on,
right?
Like, is that the kind of campaign that you run on a digital standpoint?
Right. Like, when it comes to digital, everything's
flipped. We need
flipped.
$100 leads, right? Like it doesn't make any sense. So, I would argue that there's more value, more real brand awareness that could be built digitally than in a.
Man, you bring up a great point because you don't. I totally get how much money people spend on just events. Forget trade show. Whether you host your event or somebody else's event, it's tens and thousands of dollars with absolutely no expectation of ROI.
Right.
But you turn on a LinkedIn ad campaign, you're waiting for every $10 to like turn into an opportunity.
Yeah. So that mindset, for whatever reason, hasn't been adopted digitally. And I think it's because you see that success and you can assign attribution, right? Like you can look at that and say, okay, we spent $100 and we generated, 1 lead, right? So now we spend $1,000, we generate 10 leads. And so then every campaign, everything else needs to be exactly like that. And it doesn't make sense. Like you can't rationalize in your mind, let's start spending money digitally on something that we can't necessarily track the immediate impact of. But I think is the wrong way to look at it. Just because you can't measure it doesn't mean it's not going to be meaningful or impactful.
And I know we want to break it down to leading and lagging indicators. So the lagging is the hardest thing to do, right? Because it's going to take time. You can't measure March's number in April.
It depends. I mean, it depends on the sales cycle for sure. And it depends on the company. But I think the better job you do on the front end in setting those leading indicators and those lead measures correctly in prioritizing your content strategy, if you're doing a better job at reaching your market for one, then B, educating your market, and then C, moving them on into the next stage in that sales process or that buyer's journey. In theory, and all the while, because you're leading with education, you're building brand awareness, you're building trust. In theory, you should have a more educated buyer, right? You're reaching the right person, you have a more educated buyer, and you've already nurtured them, so to speak, further in the sales process because you're educating them on what their challenges are, what your solution is, how it's going to mesh within their organization. They already trust you because you've been the one educating them, and they've seen probably case studies of what you've done in the past. So now by the time it gets to that salesperson, the sales cycle should be shorter, right? If we did all the marketing properly. So it shouldn't take as long as your traditional sales cycle because you're doing a better job. If your sales cycle or your marketing process is, let's go get a bunch of cheap leads on Facebook and get $2 a lead or $10 a lead, Now all of a sudden you're going to look at those volume of leads and you got to filter through them. Half of them don't, call you back. You can't get a hold of them. And then only a handful are actually, maybe an opportunity, but then you have to explain, you don't even remember filling out the form. So you have to explain who you are. And then that sales cycle, you're starting all the way at the beginning. You got to educate, you got to build trust because they were never educated by you. They just saw an ad. So they clicked on the ad, filled out the form. They don't know who you are. So there's no built-in brand awareness. So yeah, the volume of leads is going to be way different, but I think the end outcome can be better, shorter, faster, and higher ticket items, higher value, more stickiness, right? They'll stay with you longer because you're doing the right things on the front end. So it doesn't have to take forever. Like it depends on the channel, right? If your main focus is like just SEO, then when you implement a strategy, it might take 6 months, it might take a year to kind of start coming to fruition. And you would have that same idea because leading indicator would be our page speed and user experience, our individual keyword rankings, page performance, traffic, impressions, all those kind of things. And then you look at conversions and then sales. So it's going to take a while. But as an overall marketing approach, again, big picture, it will be faster to that sale, faster to that end result because you're doing a better job spending more resources up front.
And I know in the beginning, you kind of gave those leading indicators because I want to focus more on that because I know that's something actionable. Everybody can go back and say, well, forget the revenue part because like I said, it's also not just dependent on how well the leads are. It's also dependent on how good my quality of my sales team is. I got to tell you, you can't close a B2B deal. It's not e-commerce.
Yeah.
So if you have unqualified sales team taking these qualified leads, you can also butcher the opportunity too. I got to give it to both people.
Yeah. And it depends, right? So again, all theoretical, but the better you do, again, at educating on the marketing side, then in theory, I don't want to say the worse the salesperson can be, but they don't have to know as much because you're like kind of handing it up to them. But at the same time, if you don't have the right process in place, so let's say you're doing this, right? You're getting more educated, higher quality, you're further qualifying those leads before they even come through the funnel or come through the form. And then when they do, then you hand that lead off to a new SDR who doesn't know as much. Then it's probably going to be that great, right? Yeah. But those are your most precious leads, right? There should probably be, like you said, someone who knows what they're doing and working that sales process. So yeah, it could be overcomplicated, but I think if it's done right, then
you should be able to close them. But I do always need to bring that up too because of the fact that not everybody's trained sales professionals.
Unless it's e-commerce,
it's very difficult.
That a little bit of unknown, and it just comes down to you could have the best salesperson in the world that has 80% close ratio, and they're just having a bad day, and all of a sudden you don't get that deal, and so that's whose fault is that? Is that marketing? Is that sales?
Yeah.
It just happens.
What I want to bring back home are what are some leading indicators that they can write it down right now as they're listening to this podcast and say, I need to track A, B, C, D, E. Let's break it down. Just give it to them.
I think from overall marketing, if you're looking at all your channels, I would look at, if you're just looking at those indicators, right? If you're trying to create a dashboard,
sure, exactly. Dashboard.
It's like, I would look at traffic.
Okay.
One, right? Because the idea is attention, it's eyeballs, it's getting my people to my website to engage with my content. So traffic would be a great way to look at that. And then I would also look at overall cost per lead, but I would do that with maybe with a grain of salt. And I don't even want to say cost per lead. It depends what you're comparing to, because if you're comparing to, you've already implemented the strategy of like, okay, we're going to just focus on higher quality, then you can compare quarter over quarter volume of leads, right? And what that means in terms of actual revenue, because you already know their quality. But if you're going from this model of, we're going to gate all of our content and we're just going to run, top of the funnel ebook downloads on Facebook and LinkedIn to generate hundreds of leads, and then our salespeople are going to filter through them. You can't look at volume of leads as a metric because you had 100 and now you have 10 in a month, and everyone's going to go ballistic. So yeah, I would look at cost per lead or overall cost per acquisition obviously is more like a lagging indicator, but I would look at traffic and I would look at leads generated.
Maybe by channel.
And then, yeah, exactly what I was going to say is then I would break it down further by channel. So I would look at keyword rankings.
Would you care about repeat visitors?
Yeah. Those could be, when you start looking at some more of those engagement metrics, right, you can get into a little bit deeper in terms of like a high level dashboard. I don't know if that would make a lot of sense, but I definitely would look at like time on site, scroll depth, like
email, newsletter subscription.
Exactly. Yeah. So that kind of stuff. I mean, you just have to use common sense. Again, it's not always 100% measurable. It's just what's going to be the best for our buyer. Like what is going to be the best experience, and what does that look like? We have like this disconnect. A lot of marketers have a disconnect between like looking at their website and looking at all these analytics as just numbers and analytics. Whereas if they had a traditional, let's say they had a retail store and people were walking in the door, like
you would treat them differently.
Them and ask
exactly.
them. Like that's how it should look.
Or like how many chats that you're having,
exactly,
engagements, right? Who left you a message on the live chat because it was not an agent online?
Yeah.
Anything that I get that can help somebody through that buying journey to get from
I
A
guess
to B.
That would be the way. That would be the metric. I said, leads. It depends what a lead is to you. So if you further have identified a lead, let's say you're a software company and it's demo request, right? Then I would look at demo requests. I would stop looking at, the top of the funnel leads and trying to compare those numbers. So I would look at traffic. I would look at individual campaign metrics like cost per lead or keyword rankings or organic traffic, social media traffic, all those kind of things. And then I would look at demo requests, right? Because for a lot of marketers, that's where their job ends, right? And those are the metrics they're already tracking is like how many demo requests or how many leads am I generating for my sales team? But a demo request or whatever that scheduled consultation, that bottom of the funnel, is a better indicator that this is a quality opportunity, especially if you've already focused on only driving quality traffic, right? Then by default, the people filling out the form are going to be qualified. The second half would be the sort of lagging indicators, lag measures. I think this is going to tell the better side of the story, which is I would look at like opportunities created, pipeline created, right? Because like you said, as a marketer, it's still up to that salesperson. But if we can agree with the sales team that if it were a software company, once they go through that first qualification call, then we schedule a demo, then we're all agreeing there's an opportunity. Then as a marketer, I could say, okay, well, let's look at all of the opportunities that were created from our marketing channels. Whether you close those deals or not,
right?
That's
at least you can see which channel is driving more quantity.
Right. So opportunities created, and then another telltale sign would be like sales velocity, because as I mentioned, if you're doing a better job educating and nurturing, then you're going to close the deals faster. Lifetime value of the customer as well. That would take longer to figure out, because if your average customer stays with you for 2 years and you're trying to make that 3 years, or if it's 6 months, you're trying to make it 1 year, like you have to wait 1 year to figure that out, right? So just that stickiness, less churn, higher lifetime value, higher project size, or whatever however your business model works. I would look at those metrics, and then, like I said, look at how do you influence that by your leading indicators. So if sales velocity, it comes down to better education, then look at, okay, how are we educating those prospects? Like, are they opening our emails? Are they reading them? Are they listening to our podcasts? Are they watching our videos? And if they are, then we should see that they're more educated, they're more interested. We've prioritized them in terms of lead scoring for our salespeople, and they're closing those deals faster.
I was going to say, I think a lot of this stems from knowing your lifetime value, because you're going to be less stressed out on the front end, because you know that it's worth investing into that perfect lead. Right. And if I'm going to make $500,000, I can spend $10,000 to get a meeting.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's a qualified meeting. I'm not going to be like, that's too high, because if I win, it's $500,000. I mean, who wouldn't? But nobody thinks like that.
Right.
They're often thinking that, well, it's got to be $18 a call. I'm like,
right.
Where did you come up with that number if they're worth $500,000?
They come up with that number based on the law of, averages from their current process.
Right.
So
exactly.
we have already bad leads. So we need 1,000 leads to generate, 100 opportunities, and then we don't close any of those opportunities. So, you know what I mean?
That's true.
So when you look at that and it's $18 a lead, you're like, okay, well, it's going to cost us $18,000 to close 3 deals based on our current sales cycle.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could increase that cost per lead, right? Let's say it's 18 now. What if it's 180? What if it's 500, right? Cost per lead. But 3 out of every 4 leads turns into an opportunity and you close 50% of those.
That's what I'm saying.
Is much higher. And you need less salespeople to facilitate and handle, 10 leads over 100 leads. So it all depends on the business model, but pretty much across the board in B2B, that is a huge problem because that was the model that is like the first model that companies like HubSpot, kind of pitched is like, get them to consume your content, but in order to consume it, they got to give you your email, and then you're going to email them a million times, and then they're going to become a customer. And so because it kind of worked that way, that was the model. And it didn't matter where those people were coming from. Just get their email address, now we can market to them. But even HubSpot has changed that, right? HubSpot is now say, okay, that was the model. Now we need to be buyer centric, and being buyer centric means exactly what it sounds like. Put yourself in the buyer's shoes. Everything revolves around the buyer. Just do a better job of getting your messaging, getting your information out there. And a lot of times you don't need their email address with all the cooking and all that stuff that's going on for now. I mean,
pretty soon you don't even need their credit card.
Right. The same idea goes for what we're just talking about. It's like the volume of lead. So let's just give an example, right? If you had let's say you had a gated webinar and you were spending couple dollars a click to send traffic to that webinar from LinkedIn, Facebook, and then they went to a landing page, and then a certain percentage of those people are going to fill out the form for the landing page. So even if it's 10% of the people that fill out that form, now you have their email information. Of course, only a certain percentage of those people are going to show up. So by the end of it, you spend all this money to get cheap traffic and cheap clicks that only a small percentage, 90% of them did not convert. And then even a smaller percentage actually showed up and watched your message, right? So it's more about, in that scenario, whatever that ad says and less about what that video was, that webinar, right? Because now it's like the timeshare pitch, right? It's like you have a captive audience. They have to sit there to get their free set of golf clubs or whatever that is and listen to your pitch. But if you did it, remove that gate and was truly buyer centric, you would say, okay, same targeting because we're targeting our audience, same cost per click, but now it's not going to be 10% that convert. Maybe 70% of them are going to watch your video because you just send them to a landing page that has my video. It says, this is valuable information that is going to help you and also introduce you to our brand. And now all of a sudden you had an extra, 60% of the people, 70% of the people that are watching it and that are actually engaging with your brand rather than the very, very small handful of people that made it all the way through your funnel, right?
Right.
So
you could sell more
right.
by giving more without asking for any information.
You also have to look at your audience, right? So if you're B2B selling something big tickets, likely a C-level type, deal that you're trying to get into, unless you're selling to the secretary or whoever that may be. But even then, I mean, just look at who you're trying to sell to and who is going to fill out the form, right? So, I mean, you're a CEO. How many times do you fill out the form, right? Or
rarely.
You fill out the form, but you give your, 18th Gmail address that you never look at. So are you really being nurtured, or is it likely that you're just going to, I got to fill out the form, so I'm not going to do it. It's not worth it to me. I don't want to see what this people have to offer. You move on, you forget about it. Or you fill out with a fake email just to see what happens, or you fill out with a fake email or a real email that you never use. You use it one time to authenticate and watch the video, and then you never check that email again, so you're not getting nurtured, or you unsubscribe. So that's not a valuable process for either side, buyer or the seller.
I agree. So in that scenario, when you're not asking for anything, it's completely ungated. How would you measure the leading and the lagging?
Right. So I would look at that in terms of, in leading indicators, I would look at views, right? Because we're overlaying that again with the audience. If we do a great job in targeting, then we know that those people that are watching the video are the right audience. So we don't really care if they fill out the form because we're just trying to get in front of them and we're trying to give them information. So I would look at views. I would look at how long they're watching the video, right? The average, duration that they're watching it. I would look at their overall path. So like how many of those people then, after they watched the video, went and looked at our pricing page or our services page or anything along those lines. And then on the lagging side, again, it comes down to which side of the fence you want to put like the leads on, opportunities or leads that are generated, probably on the leading side. And then on the lag side, I would look at overall opportunities that were created and then actual revenue that came from if you want to look at it as that campaign, you could look at it that way. But again, the pieces that are missing from that is just like the overall brand awareness. Like you might need 5, 10, 15, you might need 50 touches with somebody before they become a customer or before they even fill out a form, right? But sometimes you can't measure that like brand awareness. You can't measure that like, okay, I know about you and I know what the value is that you bring, but I'm not in the market right now. You can't necessarily make someone be in the market if they're not in the market, but you could still get referrals we've gotten referrals from people who are not customers of ours because
that's right.
Their colleague asked them, or they're at a dinner party at a friend's house and they said, you guys have a good marketing team or whatever that may be. And they say, you should check this company out because someone consumes our content. So like you can't discount that idea of building a brand just because that person didn't fill out the form to watch the video. So the leading indicators, should be based more on engagement and visibility. And then the lagging indicators would be all revenue based. But I think they're still kind of short term and long term, depending on what you're trying to accomplish.
All right. Last question. 5 years from now, do you think there'll be any forms on a website?
Well, if you ask someone from Drift, they would say no, right?
Right.
It's all conversational marketing.
It's all chatbots.
5 years from now, I always think there's going to be a request to quote or schedule consultation, like the old
bottom of funnel
form. Other than that, there shouldn't be any good marketing. Shouldn't have anything.
Any friction.
That. Yeah, because the advantage of having that bottom of the funnel form is like you need to show intent, right? And one of the trends that I've seen with clients that have the top of the funnel is like you're also then confusing the buyer, right? Because if they're now accustomed to, well, if I just download this ebook, I'm going to get 50 phone calls from a SDR, over the next week. You're going to get two things that's going to happen. One, people are not going to fill out the form because they know what's going to happen. Or two, they're going to fill that out and expect you to call them. And you're not going to call because there are always bad leads that fill out the form and they don't want us to call, right? So, hey, if you want to contact me, this is what you're contacting me for, which is a sales conversation, not, to download this resource. If you want to learn, you want resources, here's all my resources, right? You want to ask a question, you want to chat and say, do you have resources about this topic? We'll send them to you. But the people who fill out the contact form, you need to know their intent and they need to know what is going to happen once they fill out the form. So I think 5 years from now, that would be it. Is just that one form. And I think the buyer will be back accustomed to like, hey, if I want to get in contact with them, I have to fill this out. Not if I just watch a webinar, someone's going to call me. Yeah.
And also I was just thinking about that quote. I just read it this morning that 71% of B2B buyers, they're done with all their research before they reach out to the sales department. 70. It's like way up then. It was 50, 60. Now it's like 71 by Google and all the places that they go before they actually raise their hand and ask question. There's 12 touches that they go through before they even contact. So I think that contact part is not going away, but I think the other parts are going to starting to go away in terms of filling out a form or whatever. Because like you said, they don't want to get a call from a person too early in that research mode.
Right. Or, you're just going to disqualify yourself, right? It's like if you have a prospect on your website and they're hopefully, right, if they're doing due diligence, they're looking at 3 or 4 different websites. So if they're looking at your website and the competitor's site, and the competitor's site has a ton of valuable information and they spend an hour on that website watching 3 different videos and, looking at their infographics and case studies, and they go to your website and then you're asking them to fill out a form, they might just move on. What's the value there? Like you said, they're already educating themselves and moving them along in that buyer's journey. And so now they have to fill out a form to just access a piece of your information when someone else is willing to do it for free. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, eventually it will drive towards that. Any final thoughts on measuring B2B marketing metrics?
No, I think, measure what you can in a way that makes sense for your overall business goals, but also don't stress out too much on the numbers. Look at the intent behind those numbers, who those people are. And then again, everything that just because it's not measurable doesn't mean it's not meaningful, right? So like I said, measure what you can, but just think about it from your buyer's perspective and don't stress out too much about the numbers.
All right. That's all we have for you in this episode. As always, check out the other episodes at oneims.com/podcast. Send in your questions. We love hearing from you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Growth Marketers is brought to you by OneIMS, helping you reach new heights through integrated marketing. One world, one web, one IMS.